Welcome everyone to the Boker Yun at Drisha in celebration of upcoming Hanukkah. And for the third session of the day, we have the pleasure of learning with Rabbanit Victoria Sutton on the topic of Sefat Ferah Shoshan, the Lily Speech, the life and teaching of Farha Sassoon, in honor of Eid al Banat, the women's celebration on Rosh Hodesh Tevet. We will explore the incredible life and work of Farha Sassoon, an Iraqi philanthropist known for her scholarship and piety. For those who have not had the pleasure of learning with her, Rabbanit Victoria Sutton is the director of teen programs at Drisha, as well as a teacher on the Judaic Studies faculty at the Heschel School, and has previously worked at Congregation Beth Israel in Berkeley. She is a Musmachet of Yeshivat Maharat, and we are always glad to have her teach.
Great. Thank you, Kayla. Really nice to get an opportunity to learn with everybody this morning. People who are off from work or taking the time, maybe on their lunch break or at any other point. Really great to learn with you. And really great to have an opportunity to share about Farha Sassoon. In the beginning, I'm just going to share a little bit of biographical information. As we know, I'm just going to spotlight. There we go. Okay. Hopefully now you can all see me better. So we have an important teaching that is that the way that people live their lives, we see this with many rabbis in the Talmud and many scholars throughout the generations, both male and female, that the way that someone lives their life is a corpus of Torah in and of itself that's worth studying, in addition to any works of Torah or any Torah that they have taught during their lives. So we're going to learn both from the life of Farha Sassoon and also from some of the Torah that she taught. I do have a slideshow that we'll share afterwards. I do encourage people to put their hands up if they have questions or if they have things to share in the chat. I might not always be able to check the chat, but maybe Kayla will give me a heads up also if there are people who have questions. So here we go. I'm going to share. Okay. Just take a second. Okay. So Farha Sassoon was born in Mumbai to an Iraqi family. Her family was extremely well off. People might have, she ended up marrying into the Sassoon family, but she was also a descendant of the Sassoon family. I'm putting a little bit of the Sassoon family tree on the screen. Her mother, Aziza, was from the Sassoon family, and her father, Ephraim Gabe, was from also a very prominent, wealthy, and philanthropic family as well from the Iraqi community. They had gone to this for the business, and there's a lot of books that have been written in the past decade or two about the Sassoon family. Also, if you notice, this is from Sotheby's. Sotheby's had a few years ago an auction of the Sassoon collection that for her children that had she inherited, but that she worked very hard also to curate. So if people are interested, they can check, and it's all on Sotheby's website. I'll be sharing a couple of the items here, but definitely worth checking to see how much of an interest she had in that, in her careful eye. She was named after her great-great-grandmother, Farha Sassoon, if you notice up here on the top right. So Farha is an Arabic name that means simha, or it means joy. So that is the name that she often goes by if you look at correspondence that she had. But in Hebrew, and we'll see the name of the talk that she gave at the Rabbinical College in London, that Farha also in Hebrew is Ferah, or flower. So an anglicized version of this name is often Flora. So you'll see her also called Flora Sassoon. So they were a well-known Baghdadi family. They were founders of the Jewish community in Bombay, very philanthropic, as well as in Shanghai and in Hong Kong. She was educated privately. I'll just stop sharing for a second. She was educated privately by tutors, which seems like it was not uncommon in that time. That well-to-do Iraqi families who were also very concerned about maintaining the Jewish tradition, both Torah scholarship, which was very important to them, and also religious practice that they not only educated their sons with private tutors, but they also educated their daughters. So Farha had a private tutor, and they would have chachamim who would come from Baghdad. They were also very devout in their practice. So she had a very strong backing from her private tutors in not only Tanakh and Halakha, but she studied Talmud. She learned also rabbinic responsa as the years went on. And she spoke 7 languages, which also probably helped her in the business world, as we'll see. Her sister, Rina, who ended up living in Jerusalem, also was well known in Jerusalem as somebody who was very knowledgeable in Torah and also very knowledgeable in Zohar. Zohar was sort of like the lingua franca of the Jews of Iraq, that it was something that really connected them, like their heart and soul, to, as we'll see from the Ben Ish Chai a little bit, that's something that really was a hook for people to connect to Torah. So she also married into the Sassoon family in 1876. I'll just share a screen of her. Share again. All right. So this is her husband. That's on their wedding day in 1876 in their beautiful palazzo, as you could see. They also had a private synagogue in their home. They ended up having 3 children. David, who was named for the patriarch David Sassoon, Rachel, and Mosley were their 3 children. In 1894, his life was cut very short, her husband's life. She was in her 30s, and he passed away quite suddenly. And just to show that the family's relationship with the Ben Ish Chai, for those who are not familiar, was a really important rabbinic figure in Iraq at the time, very prolific, very, very influential. And we'll see a little bit more of him and his relationship with Farha Sassoon. So he actually came personally to the family in Bombay, and he delivered it's like a 30-page handwritten eulogy. And after he delivered the eulogy, which I put up on the screen, he wrote it down. He sat and wrote it down for the family, and with tears handed it to them so that they could keep it. It is one of the things that Sotheby's has in their collection that they were auctioning off, which is pretty incredible. So she kept up personal correspondence with the Ben Ish Chai, which is quite unusual. We're going to see kind of the both sides of her. I'm not focusing on the business and the philanthropic side, although it can't be ignored, right, that this family of such prominence would have relationships with the leading rabbis of the day, right, because of their philanthropic activities, which Farha continued. She took over her husband's family business in the 90s, and many of the philanthropic activities that her husband was doing, despite people's hesitations at the time. So he wrote some personal correspondence with her. This is in 1906, so a little bit later, once she was already living in London, but I think it gives us a little bit of a little taste of who she was and the kind of life that she lived. So he writes, Ha'uva Yikara Farha Saliman David Sassoon. So he writes her the letter. The first paragraph, he's really just checking in on her. I hope you're doing well. And, the holiday of Pesach was coming up. This is in Nisan. I hope your children are doing well. And that we should only hear good things. And then in the second paragraph, I'm going to read in Hebrew and just translate. It says, Lifnei shnatayim, הובן מעיתון לונדון שהחכם באשי של לונדון, הרב אדלר, רגיל לדרוש משפט הגדול, ויכתוב בעיתון את הסוגיה שהולך לדרוש, כדי שיראו אותה קודם ויבין הדברים שאמר בה. So the chief rabbi of London, Rav Adler, who was the son of the original chief rabbi of London, I imagine. This is the second Rav Adler, who is an interesting character in itself, an extremely educated and worldly individual. But yeah, when he gave his Shabbat Hagadol Drash, and historically, rabbis didn't necessarily give a long speech every Shabbat, but the Shabbat right before Pesach, Shabbat Hagadol, and the Shabbat between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and Shabbat Shuvah, they would give a very extended class with sources, right? And that would be like kind of like a centerpiece for the rabbi to share their scholarship with the community, but also get them ready for the holiday to come. So what he used to do was, and we're very familiar with PR these days, is he would publish what he was going to speak about in the Jewish newspaper before the class. But he would not only just publish the title, like, oh, a catchy title to get everybody to show up on Shabbat Gadol, but he would actually say, this is the sugya, this is the section in the Gemara that I'm going to discuss in my class. Right, which means like it was going to be a little bit of a pilpul, like a back and forth, so that people maybe would look at it in advance and become familiar with what was he going to talk about, right? Because as we'll see, this is before the age of the ubiquitous source sheets and Sefaria, which we were very grateful and thankful for, that when a rabbi, a Rabbanit, or someone wants to give a class, right, they go to Sefaria, they get the sources, they print them, and can make hundreds of copies for everybody to look at while they're doing it. So that didn't exist during that time. So what did she do? Okay. Ve'at, you, Farha HaMechubedet, Your Honor, halachat lidrosh shelo. So you went to his speech, Rav Adler's speech. V'aveit itrach Gemara, k'dei shtavinu ma sheyidrosh ba. She brought our Gemara from home, so she knew what he was going to speak about, so that she could sit in the synagogue in London in 1906 with her Gemara and follow along exactly what the rabbi was going to speak about. We'll see his take on this in a second. He's a little bit judgmental of not her for doing this, which people who know me know that I've definitely done this, right? That like many of the synagogues where I attend, definitely not the synagogue where I was a rabbanit, but many of the synagogues where I attend, if I would show up to like the rabbi's talk and just have like a Sefer or Gemara open and be following along, right? They would definitely raise some eyebrows. But that was very natural for him to see that she did that, because of course she would do that, right? Of course, she's a Talmid Chacham, of course she would do that. But fascinating to think that, right, she wanted to really be involved and show up and really follow along to make sure that everything, she could really get everything that he was saying, and also probably ask follow-up questions, right, in a more pointed way, since she had the sources in front of her. And that's something I taught this source to our, I know Kayla mentioned that I'm the director of the team programs. We had a little pre-Hanukkah learning on Sunday with some of the middle schoolers and high schoolers who've attended Drisha in the past in the summer, and others who just wanted to learn some Torah on a Sunday morning. And I shared this, and I said that although I'm no Farha Sassoon, I definitely can relate to being that person who wants to go to the Beit Midrash and take a book off the shelf and look up, well, what are they actually talking about, right? Does it say what they say it says? Do I have any questions about it? Am I following along, right? And that is definitely the sharpness and the interest that she had on a regular basis with Torah. So he continues and he says, I really want to know, I'm super curious. I'm really curious. Are the people in London holding in the details of the back and forth of an intensive Gemara conversation? Are they so wise and knowledgeable that when they come for Shabbat HaGadol Drash to be inspired before Pesach, that's where people I know your head is there, but is that where everybody else is? Because I would be a little bit interested and surprised to know that. Right? If this is not a nice thing to say, but basically if 75% of them are Rikim, the Gemara uses this in talking about empty from Torah and mitzvot, or empty from learning, right? They're not full of Torah learning, right? So if most of them aren't at that level, right? What's the point of giving this type of talk on Shabbat Gadol for you and the two other people who are sitting there who understand what he's talking about? Okay. And I know you're going to stay in London, and if you come visit again, please let me know. But he wanted to know her opinion of sort of whether the people in London were knowledgeable or not, which is pretty fascinating, right? To think about that he's asking her opinion, right? Not reaching out to Rav Adler himself, but he has a relationship with her and trusts her knowledge on this, and saying, oh, are people in London very wise? The Ben Ish Chai, we're going to see a little bit more of his ongoing relationship with her in terms of respecting her scholarship. But he also was coming from a place that he, and we'll see this in the next source, that he didn't think that this was the right way to approach people. He was very famous for his Shabbat afternoon classes. And if people have read the Ben Ish Chai on the Parsha, that he often starts with Kabbalah. He starts with something that he's like, you need to find a hook. You need to connect with people where they're at, whether they're knowledgeable in Gemara or not. You need to like ignite people and connect with them. And he did, although he knew that Farha Sassoon was following, he felt like this was not the best way. He also wrote a book for women specifically in Arabic on halakha, the Kanun al Nasa, or it's been translated into Hebrew, which is sort of a really groundbreaking work to say, I want to relate to people where they are in their lives and write a book of halakha for them. It was definitely not meant for women like Farha Sassoon, who could read the Gemara and the rabbinic literature on their own, but was meant for like the regular everyday person. And that was something that was very important to the Ben Ish Chai. And also just to show how he held up women's learning and women's Torah knowledge in general. The next source, before we get to the actual a speech that she gave and some of her teaching, is this is another fascinating practice of the Ben Ish Chai, which he basically said was just a lot of fun for him, that he has a whole book in Iraqi, he has a whole section where he wrote riddles. And this is a section of riddles on specific people. So he wrote a riddle about Farha Sassoon. And so here's in the original, but I'm going to just put it up here, and we'll look at it together just to get a sense of how he thought of her. So he says, Oto tova pa'amim, I'll read it in Hebrew first. Oto tova pa'amayim hayiti, b'shmi yivrachu le'el sal'i mitudati, hineni noi bracha hineni, hine anochi yoshevet b'shevet tachtamoni, ha'em mismoli v'ha'gefen mimini, v'arotze l'hakireni yiret arba'a banim bebitmi, u'bimlo hareshit imsa ha'acharit. People who might know, the Ben Ish Chai also wrote many piyutim and really had a way with words and poetry and seemed to really enjoy it. So he honored her in this way, and we'll see what he says about her. So we'll go through it line by line, and I put some notes on the bottom. So it's supposed to be a hint at her name. So it says, twice I was a sign for goodness. So if you look at the note for line 1, that her name is Farha, and the term farech, to blossom, or to basically to blossom, that a flower should blossom, shows up twice as a really good sign in the Torah. Once in last week's parsha with the dream of the, squeezing the grapes, the Sar HaMashkim, that Joseph explains his dream to him, that he says, I saw the grapes blossoming. And the second is the staff of Aaron, that the grapes are blossoming, which was also a sign of goodness. I am a beautiful bracha. I'm a beautiful blessing. So this is about the blessing that we say on the new trees in Nisan, which he wrote a beautiful piyut also about trees for Tu B'Shvat. But that we only say it on trees that are really beautiful, right? That show off their beauty with flowers that are going to turn into fruit. So she represents, as Farha, this beautiful blessing. Behold, I dwell in the seat of my wisdom, with my mother to my left and my vines to my right. Hineni no bracha also is the gematria, which that's a little bit more detailed, but her name equals 293, and beautiful blessing also equals 293. The Ben Ish Chai was a big fan of gematria and threw it in whenever possible, and it was also really fun for him. So this is a hint at both the wisdom of Solomon and the wisdom of Farha Sassoon. That Solomon was wise, known for being wise. She was also known for her wisdom. And he talks about in Shir Shirim, the term blossoming, for when the grapes are, the place where the grapes will blossom and all different things will flower is the place where I will find my love, is in Shir Shirim. And then those who wish to know me is a play on the name Farha, which has 4 letters. This is a little more complicated. The middle letters, the belly letters, are Resh and Chet, and they have the same numeric value as the word Ben. which is 52. So 52 times 4 is 208. And then the last one is that the first letter of her name is a fe, which when you write it fully, like when you put the H at the end, right with the last letter is the same as the last letter of her name. So we see here that through his writing, he had deep respect for her knowledge and her just everything that she brought. She actually visited the Ben Ish Chai in Iraq, and whenever she would travel, she was known to travel with an entourage, not only because of her, like, I guess, economic standing, as you can imagine, but she also always made sure to travel with a shochet, so that she could have kosher food. She always made sure to try. It's like the older version of, I guess, bringing like those like meal mart meals with you, right? It's like traveling with your own shochet if you can do it, so you can have like fresh, delicious meals wherever you go. She would also travel with a minyan. That was really important to her to be able to have services to Pilat every single day. And so she would travel with her own minyan. And she was even known to read from the Torah during her travels. That when she was in Baghdad for 3 months, she herself read from the Torah in the synagogue, using a scroll that had been dedicated in the previous century by a patriarch of the Sassoon family. And just to make the point here, by those who are sort of surprised that she would, right, it's not so usual, right, to have a woman reading Torah in synagogue, especially in Iraq. And just to sort of make the small point that she, I'm sure, was familiar with the sources, that, right, the Mishnah and the Shulchan Aruch and many later sources note that women, right, Hakol Alin, that women are able to read the Torah and count towards the Torah reading, let's say on a Shabbat morning of the 7 Aliyot. But the reason that we don't have it happen is something called Kivod HaTzibor, which is beyond the scope of this class, but just to mention her standing. The Kivod HaTzibor is sort of a category of like either the standing of women in society or how we understand women in religious roles, in very short form. There's a lot written about that. But that it's also been written that somebody like Farha Sassoon, somebody who easily surrounded by their own entourage or was extremely respected by the community and by everybody who was present, for sure there's no issue of kavod tzibor, right? Somebody who clearly demanded that kind of respect because of the person that she was, and the people that she would have around her. And we see some instances also of matriarchs of families in some of the rabbinic literature, in these very educated families having these similar private minyanim where they would be able to do this. The understanding being that everybody who was there deeply respected them, either as the matriarch of the family or sort of a patroness or somebody who they looked up to, as Farha. Okay. I'm just going to share my screen again. So the family moved to London. She moved to London to finish, there we go, to work on the family business there. She was not, she had a hard time, I think, in London with the way, it wasn't the same to her as like when she visited Iraq, or I guess the way that they lived their lives in Bombay, that they felt like, that she felt like she was really surrounded herself in a place of Torah and with like-minded Jews. And that when she went to London, it seemed like it was, right, and maybe it makes sense that like Jews who would have emigrated to London maybe were looking for a more cosmopolitan experience, and maybe not traditional in the same way that she felt was really important. So she was in London, and she continued to do really important philanthropic things, which I'll mention maybe if we have time or at the end. But this is a really, we're going to spend a good chunk of time on this address, which is the title of the class. She was invited in 1924 to give the speech at Jews College in London, which if you see from the Hebrew, now Jews College, I think in the past 30 years, has become more of a college in general. But at this point in the 20s, it was actually a rabbinical school. And it was meant to ordained rabbis, the Beit Midrash Rabbanim. So she was basically, at this point, she was in her 60s, and had been well known already in the London community for at least 20 years as an important person. So in that role, and also as somebody who was extremely knowledgeable on Torah sources, she was invited to speak. And we're going to see some interesting things from her speech. Number one, we can imagine, right, that somebody who's invited to speak she's invited to speak probably because of her position in the community, because of her patronage, but also that she doesn't deliver a speech that is a speech of like a business person or a patron. She delivers the speech of a scholar, as speaking to the future leaders of the Jewish community in England. And she speaks to them in a language that she hopes they understand, which is the language of the Talmud. Is there a question? No? Okay. And we're going to see that how she starts off in acknowledging that, this is, right, she acknowledges this is a little bit awkward, right? There had never been a woman before. So she says, I feel my duty to express, first of all, my heartfelt thanks to the Council of Jews College for so kindly inviting me to preside over this year's assembly. He thought that this year, the ablest person to take the chair. And at the time, I wondered if it was not the rule, since the college was founded, to have a lady preside. And therefore, it was not such a happening before, then why should I have thus been honored? Meaning, like, I just assumed you don't have women do this because, like, right, it's been quite a while and I'm the first one. On the other hand, why did it not happen in the whole of the 68 years? And then she asks the other question, right? Like, this is awkward, right? Why did you wait almost 70 years to invite a woman to preside over this and to be involved in this? So she gives an answer, which I think is so esoteric that it's baffling. And she says, the leaders may have thought, for sure they never thought this, that the chairmanship of the speech day is like the Ketoret in the temple. Right? It's something holy that gets offered up, right? But she finds a source to talk about something that's once in 60 or 70 years, which really just shows her brilliance in that she's thinking of this event of something that happens, on the one hand, it happens very rarely. On the other hand, we include it in the whole, and it's actually really important and significant and holy. That she's trying to say this is not an aberration, and at least it happens every once 60 or 70 years. She's going to push a little harder in the next quote, we'll see. But she says that the little extra, they used to make 72 portions of the ketoret, and every 60 or 70 years, it adds up to enough that we can like add it back in to be kosher. So he says, then a woman also for sure would be kosher. But then her next source is a little bit more strong and forceful. And she brings up Deborah. We have a precedent in the Bible that in troublous times, Barak told Deborah, Im tachemi vehalachti, v'im lo tachemi lo elech. That Barak says, I need you, to Deborah. If people are familiar with the story in Shoftim, right, that Deborah was the Shofetet, or the Jewish leader at that time. But the Shoftim were not only religious leaders, they were also military leaders. Barak was the head of the army. And when they went to fight Sisera, the Canaanite enemy, she was sending him off to war. And he basically said, I can't do this alone. I can't do this without your leadership. And so that's kind of what she's telling them, right? Like, you need me. I'm glad you invited me because you really need my leadership here. I have what to teach you about how to run a rabbinical school and how to be good rabbis in communities. After the victory, Deborah addressed everybody. This is in the famous Shirat Deborah. And she says, Before Perot B'Yisrael, right, in the time when there were breaches in Israel. In the context in Shoftim, this is about the actual physical breaches, right? That they were being attacked by the Canaanites and by others. But she's applying this to the present occasion. It could be that what she means here is the world around, right? That it's a troubled time, that in the 20s in London, maybe with everything going on, and we'll see, she talks about this a little bit later in the speech, right, that the Jewish community was not maybe so settled, and that it wasn't so obvious that there would be a rabbinical school, and wasn't so obvious that people would turn to Torah and Torah scholarship and make it central in their lives. And so maybe she's applying that to the situation. If others have other thoughts, I'd be interested to see them. Binadev am, right? When people were giving of, right? People were giving of heart. When the men invited me to take lead today, for which I say, Baruch Adonai, bless God. And then she continues in these words, right? She's kind of channeling Deborah at the very beginning of the speech, right? Shim'u melachim, hear kings. And who are the kings? And she's building them up there. Like you, rabbis, listen, Hazinu. And she's like building up the rabbis that maybe they weren't getting, especially in, I guess, the Commonwealth, where like, right, there are kings and queens that were still very much honored at this time, especially before World War II, where they had a very like a more important role. That she's sort of saying, no, you are the respected leaders, you rabbis that I'm talking to today, right? Not just the king and queen who live in Buckingham Palace, right? You have an important leadership and a very exalted leadership role to play. She then shares, and just the extent of obscure things that she quotes from the Talmud is incredible. She says a particular thing which women used to do in Talmudic times, and this is in Masachet Ketubot, Dadune de Mashcha Aresha de Rabbanan, which Rashi explains as Hanashim Notnot Shemen B'Rosh Talmidim, that women used to anoint the heads of the disciples with oil. That they had an official role, that she's here at this rabbinical college that is ordaining clergy, and that like that's actually something that women had a big role in. And she says that it's not actually just anointing oil, that it was symbolic of the oil of Torah, and that only women had this privilege for taking their children to the Beit HaMidrash. And so she's both thanking them, but also, if we see in the next paragraph, right, pushing them. Right, what was the object of this foundation, and what's expected of it? To spread Torah, V'ora, Torah and light in the British Empire. Right, that this is something that's really important to spread. This is also very British, the way that she translated Derech Eretz. As an institution like Jews College stands for combining three of the greatest ideals in Judaism: the ideals of Torah, Yirat Shamayim, and Derech Eretz. Torah, fear of God, and this is very British, good manners, which is very important at the time. You could translate Derech Eretz a lot of different ways. Here in this building resound day by day, week by week, year in and year out, the sacred words of Torah. And she's really encouraging them in their role to really safeguard the community and keeping up the Torah study. On page 7, and this I find really fascinating, is that she's speaking to a rabbinical college, and she's giving like these really lofty words, and then she tells a story about her grandson. And we get to see her as a grandmother, but also a very specific kind of grandmother who's raised a very specific kind of family with very specific values. So even in this story, which I'll read in a second, I think we can see the goal setting that she's putting for them, that she has very high goals for herself and for her family in Torah scholarship and the way they live their lives. And that in London in the 20s, that maybe that wasn't something that all Jews were behind. And that actually, right, she's pushing them to say, no, this is what you should expect of your family and maybe the communities where you are. And so in the second paragraph, she says, more recently, we find a trend of mind in our own community, which tries to deride and minimize the worth of the Torah by declaring it childless and useless. Right? You can think, especially as Jews became in the late 1800s, able to become citizens of countries, able to attend university, able to have more professional, like full of professional lives in the professions than they were able to before in Europe, that maybe they were looking at their ancestral tradition as like something that's like for kids. They learned it as kids, and like it's not something that's erudite. It's not something that's really important in the 20th century. And she says, I may quote a personal experience of the childish influence of the Torah. Last summer, when we visited Baden-Baden, right, so they were, we made an excursion to a neighboring famous place known to most people, Heidelberg. When we returned in the evening, I was agreeably surprised to find a letter written to me by my little grandson, who was then not 8 years of age, which he concludes by quoting Shemot. This is the kind of letters her 8-year-old grandson is writing to her, which concluded with the quotation, V'im tiyuli mamlechet kohanim v'goy kadosh, you shall be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation to me. Besides that veiled, like, my grandson writes to me Torah letters, and what is your right? What happens in your home? Well, which of us would not wish that each Jew, humble or high, rich or poor, learned or unlearned, young or old, men and women, would be v'chol banecha l'modei Hashem, that everybody should be taught Torah, and be filled with the meaning and strength of being an Am Segula, a chosen nation, and a kingdom of priests. How can teachings which endeavor to implant the highest ideals of honor and truth, of sobriety and temperance, be accounted useless? So I'll stop sharing for a second, and then we'll look at one more, her closing letter, and a few more things of hers. But what she's doing in this speech is both raising up, I think it's quite brilliant. On the one hand, acknowledging that as a woman, she understands partly why she's there, but also really giving them an understanding of why she should be there, not only as a woman, but how to include women in this more, but really holding up her values that she lived throughout her life, of somebody who had been very successful, came from a successful family, but had continued that success, right? Was very adept in the business world, and in the real world of philanthropy, but also felt like learning Gemara, learning Torah, learning the values was essential for her, and really felt like that was something that she could bring here. She in many ways, I think, embodied an ideal that we often see in the Sephardic world, of the individual who's both really successful on the business front, but also spends their time going to shiurim in the morning, and enjoys Torah and wishes they could spend more time in it, and is able to speak with rabbis and support rabbis, but also really be a part of the learning. And she really tried to bridge both of those things, which maybe was not as common, maybe let's say in England, and sharing that with these future rabbis. I'll just share the last the thank you that she sent. Okay. So she thanks them for their thank yous, and she was greatly pleased to be present on the occasion and listen to the other talks. And she just has one more word before I resume my seat. In the first Masechta, in the first treatise of the Talmud, in Brachot 31, it says, Al yivater adam mechavero, ela mitoch davar halacha. That when a person parts from a friend, they should always mention a davar halacha. They should never leave before saying a word of halacha to each other. And if one halacha makes a happy parting, then how much good may come from many halachot? And therefore, I will quote to you from the last passage of the whole Talmud. Right? This is a very famous saying, which people say after the Ketoret. She started with the Ketoret, and communities which say the Ketoret every day still say this line as well after the Ketoret. But just the fact of her saying, I'm going to quote you from the first section of the Talmud, right, of the 63 tractates. And then I'm going to quote to you from the very end of the Talmud, kind of implying to them that she is holding in scholarship of the everything in between, of the A to Z entire Talmud, and expecting the same from them. And so she says, Tanad be'eliyahu, kol hashana lachot b'chol yom, muftach la shu ben olam haba, shneimar, halichot olam la, al tikri halichot ela halachot. Right, it was taught in the school. I can hear my grandfather used to say this all the time at the end of the Ketoret, so he had a very specific way of reading it. It was taught in the school of Eliyahu that he who studies halachot daily may be assured of being a son of the world to come. Right, his ways are his, and read not ways, actually, right, play on the word halichot, but halachot, right, not the ways, but one who studies the laws. What is the difference between halichot and halachot? Halichot olam is the general walk of all colleges, but it is halachot for a Jewish college. Really trying to build them up in their endeavors of what they're trying to do at Jewish College, and create a seat of learning in London, and saying that they should be proud of what they're doing. So that was the famous speech that she gave at Jews College that's been printed. And again, the play on the name Farha Sassoon, which was the title of the talk, was the lilies, the mouth of the lily speaks, which was a play on her name, Farha Sassoon, right? Which also is just, she must have really appreciated the Ben Ish Chai's riddle to her. To write a fancy riddle like that, if you think of like these fancy salons over time, and these are the types of gatherings that she would also have in her home, that she would have intellectuals and scholars and artists, that she appreciated, right, this kind of play on words and was very sophisticated. So she was somebody who clearly also appreciated that in how she titled her talk. We'll just look at very briefly one. She wrote a couple of other articles that were published. So this is from an article that she wrote about Rashi. And it's clear that she was writing like beyond just the, main ideas about Rashi. Second. So she demonstrates a deep knowledge of Rashi's commentary and also his well-known responsa. She also seems to have knowledge of rare manuscripts from Sephardic lands, because she compares those manuscripts to Rashi. Rashi lived in 11th century in northern France. And she compares, like, Rashi often focuses on the language and, right, what she saw in those documents with what Rashi does. For example, she cites a story of uneducated Jews, simple Jews who lived in northern Mesopotamia, who still spoke Aramaic. Aramaic is a language that's still spoken in some areas. And they use the same term as the Talmud for these like little small sticks of wood. And Rashi, and she being an Iraqi Jew, felt very good about this, that Rashi translates in his commentary based on a received tradition that he has from the Babylonian Gaonim, the heads of the Babylonian yeshivot, who were after the time of the Gemara, meaning Iraq, right? Babylon became Iraq. Because Aramaic was no longer spoken in Rashi's time and place, she's like, oh, well, he had to look to the people who are still living in this land where the rabbis of the Talmud still, right, and the Geonim came after them, right, that she comes from that unbroken tradition of Iraqi scholarship, and she saw herself in that line, and that Rashi brought their scholarship to help understand what are the rabbis of the Talmud actually saying, and that even uneducated people who live in those areas, who maybe still speak Aramaic but don't know a lot of Torah, could open up and understand things that even a Torah scholar in Germany or France could not understand, just because of their natural connection to the place and to the language that was being spoken, which is a really interesting insight. She also discusses, people are familiar with the books that I've written about Rashi's daughters, and also the lore about that. She does bring praiseworthy citations of his views on women, and she also discusses the lives of his daughters. She wrote a few other articles as well over time. I'm going to share one more important piece of correspondence that she had, just to give a sense of, first of all, who she was and what was on her mind. So this is from the Yayin HaTov, which is a book of responsa written by Yitzchak ben Rahamim Nisim, who is the Sephardic chief rabbi in Israel. And in his responsa, she wrote a question, and so this is the question, and then we'll see how he starts off with great praise for her. So she asks, Netilat yadayim shacharit. Okay, in the morning, when you wash your hands in the morning, im yesh levarech kodem haniguv or achar haniguv, right? Do you make the blessing? You wash your hands. Should you make the blessing al netilat yadayim before you dry your hands or after you dry your hands? V'chen, and similarly, berkata tevilah, right? When somebody immerses in a mikveh, should they make the blessing? Should a woman make a blessing before she immerses or after the first immersion? V'neirot Shabbat v'Yom Tov, and candlelighting on Shabbat and also on Yom Tov. When do you make the bracha? Is it before lighting the candles or after lighting the candles, right? For all of these things, do we bless before or do we bless after them? Now, on the one hand, this seems like a really simple question because you're like, wait, we do these every day. But in fact, these are things that communities have a wide variety of practices. There's a general rule of making brachot over lesiyatan, that you make brachot before you do a mitzvah. And these are the famous exceptions that different Sephardi and Ashkenazi communities actually have very different ways of doing this. And so he starts answering. It's actually like a 9-page teshuvah, so I'll just bring the very beginning. And he says, Nishalti meha Rabbanit hanodaat hagvira hamaforsemet Farha eshet asar Hamanoach Saliman David Sassoon in London. He said, I was asked by the well-known or famous, the well-known Rabbanit, the famous mistress Farha, she should live, who was married to Saliman David Sassoon. כיצד הוא לנהוג בברכת על נטילת ידיים שחרית, אם לברך קודם הניגוב או לאחר הניגוב. Right? And how should I do this? Please let me know. And so it was veiled as a simple question, but actually, because he wrote a 9-page response, and then at the end, that's all I won't show it for the sake of time, but as is very common for rabbis to write in their responses, like, I had to keep it really, really short because I really rushed. So if I missed anything, like, let me know 9 pages later. But he goes into great detail, which just shows how significant and important her question was, that actually this is something that she was seeing people do different things and felt like it was important for people to know. Like, what's the right way to do something, right? These kinds of things that are done every single day, every single week, every single month, that people should know the appropriate and proper way to do it. And maybe that there was an assumption that sort of everybody knew exactly how to do it. And often these are the laws that are rarely taught. I see them being taught a lot more now that people are interested. You sort of just see what other people do and then you follow them. But you also want to know, like, what's the right way to do it? I'll just mention in closing some of the philanthropic activities just to get a sense of who she was. And I'll share my screen for the last couple of minutes. Okay. Second. So some of the notable things which she did with and not only just funding Jewish institutions, but following a serious plague of cholera in Bombay, she supported a young Jewish bacteriologist named Waldemar Mordechai Hafkin, who developed an effective vaccine. And she led a campaign to get people inoculated, despite the fact that the Hindus and Muslims that lived there were a little bit dubious, that she pushed, right, not only for the Jewish community, but really for the larger community to be inoculated, which was a life-saving. Another thing that she did in Bombay was she was very actively involved in the anti-purdah movement. So this was that in a lot of Muslim countries, you see this in certain other societies as well, that there was a practice of women to be sort of sheltered, or that they would have their own like compound in the house and they would keep themselves veiled. They wouldn't really go out so much. And that she really, as a woman of the world, tried to help push against that. Another notable thing was that this is a letter written to her by Rabbi Zalman in San Francisco in 1906, that she gave financial aid to the Jewish community there in the wake of the San Francisco earthquake. And he thanked her for that. She passed away on the 19th of Tevet in 1936. And the chief rabbi, Herzog, gave a eulogy at her funeral. And he described her as a living well of Torah, of piety, of wisdom, of goodness and charity, of the staunchest loyalty to tradition, and out of her wonderful well, Israel could draw in abundance noble incentives and lofty inspiration. I hope that was just a taste of Farha Sassoon and the life that she lived and the Torah that she taught and the values that were important to her. I want to share in just the last 1 minute a deeper connection to Hanukkah. Besides being somebody who, and this is something that we value a lot in Hanukkah, that the Maccabee would be proud of, somebody who makes their way in the world with the Torah front and center, right? That no matter where they go in the world, that their Torah scholarship, they take it seriously. Their religious pride um, and values come with them everywhere that they go. And she certainly embodied that everywhere that she went and tried to spread that not only in funding things, but also really in just being that light, right? Being somebody that people could look up to. There are stories of other young women who, there's a famous story of like a young woman who was learning and her father said like, you should learn Talmud in Iraq. And so she would secretly listen to her father's talk with his her father's learning with his colleague, and that maybe that she was like, oh, there are people like Farha Sassoon who also do this, and that she's of that ilk. So to just share that, but as I put in the little blurb, um, her passing was in Tevet, which Hanukkah leads into Tevet, but that Rosh Hodesh Tevet, the on Hanukkah, is actually a very specific holiday in many North African countries, called Eid al Banat, or Chag Banot in Hebrew, which is a day to celebrate women and a day to celebrate the historical heroines of Judith from the Hanukkah story, other heroines, and also celebrate women in the community. And communities had very widely various customs on this day, right, of celebrating the women in their own community. So hopefully that's something that we can continue to, whether you have that custom or not. It is a really beautiful custom in honoring women of the community during Hanukkah as well. Thank you everybody for joining. I will share the slideshow with Kayla, who I think it will end up on the Jusha website at some point. But thank you all for joining. Hanukkah Sameach.
Thank you, everyone. Hanukkah Sameach, and thank you for making time for Torah today. Take care and be well.